July 15th, 1987. It's been 11 years since I started with the Forest Service, 11 years of search and rescue out in the Stanislaw National Forest. You get used to lost hikers, panicked families, and the occasional animal attack, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that summer. The day started like any other. I was at the ranger station going through some paperwork when the call came in. A kid had gone missing a few hours back. Name was Tommy W.S., 9 years old. Last seen on a trail near his campsite. The usual setup. My partner Ryan and I headed out to the campsite. As we drove, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to loom over the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, or maybe it was just the coffee I had that morning not sitting right. We arrived at the campsite just as the sun was starting to dip below the tree line. The first thing that struck me was the silence. Usually in these situations, you've got a bunch of panicked family members, other campers trying to help, but here it was just Tommy's parents standing by their tent-looking shell. Shocked, Rye approached them first. Mr. and Mrs. W.S., he asked, his voice gentle. They nodded, and that's when I noticed something off about Mr. W.S. He kept glancing back at the tree line, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Can you tell us what happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. Mrs. Wild spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. We were having lunch. Tommy was right there at the table, turned away for just a moment to grab something from the cooler, and when I looked back, he was gone. Mr. W.S. cut in, his voice ragged. It took him, that thing took him. Rye and I exchanged a glance. What do you mean by thing? Sarai asked. Mr. Wes's eyes darted back to the trees. Big, hairy. It moved so fast. 1 second Tommy was there, the next it just snatched him up like he was nothing. I've heard my fair share of tall tales in the woods. Overactive imaginations. Too much. Campfire whiskey, that sort of thing, but this was different. The fear in Mr. Wes's eyes was real. Did anyone else see this thing? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Mrs. W.S. nodded. The family in the next campsite, they're the ones who called you. They left right after. Great. Our only other witnesses had bolted. I couldn't blame them, really. If what they saw was half as terrifying as what Mr. W.S. was describing, I'd want to get the hell out of Dodge too. Ray pulled me aside. What do you think? He asked in a low voice. I shook my head. I don't know. Man could be a bear, I guess, but snatching a kid in broad daylight, that's not normal behavior. Ray nodded. Let's get a grid search going, standard protocol. For now, we called him back up and set up a command post. As the sun set, we began our search, combing through the dense forest surrounding the campsite. The darkness seemed to press in on us, our flashlights barely penetrating the thick canopy above. Hours passed with no sign of Tommy. We found a few footprints that might have been his, but they disappeared after a few yards. It was like the kid had vanished into thin air. As we regrouped near midnight, I noticed something odd. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Nothing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. That's when we heard it, a scream, high pitched and terrified, echoing through the trees. It was coming from the northeast, deeper into the forest. Tommy. Mrs. W.S. cried out, trying to run towards the sound. Rye held her back while I radioed our position to the rest of the search team were going in. I told Rai. He nodded, his face grim in the harsh light of our flashlights. We moved quickly but cautiously through the underbrush, our senses on high alert. The scream had stopped, but now there was something else. A low rumbling sound, almost like a growl. A deeper, more wrong. Somehow we came to a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, standing on its hind legs, but as my flashlight beam swept over it, I realized this was something else entirely. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, covered in thick dark fur. But it wasn't a bear. Its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs too, long too human-like, and its face, God, its face, it wasn't quite human, not quite animal, something just wrong about it. Twisted and strange, the thing was hunched over something small and still, on the ground with a sickening lurch in my stomach. I realized it was Tommy. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking. The creature's head snapped up, its eyes reflecting the light of my flashlight like yellow marbles. It didn't look scared or even startled. It was sizing us up. Rai raised his rifle, but before he could get a shot off, the thing moved. It was impossibly fast, crossing the clearing in what seemed like a single bound. I fired, the sound of the shot deafening in the quiet forest, but I missed. The creature slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. Pain exploded through my chest as its claws raked across me, tearing through my jacket like it was tissue paper. I could feel hot breath on my face, smelled the stench of rotting meat. Another shot rang out, and the creature jerked back. Ray had managed to hit it, but it didn't go down. Instead, it let out a roar that was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human. It was a sound of rage and pain that seemed to shake the very trees around us. The creature turned and bolted back into the trees, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something its size. Struggled to my feet, my hand pressed against my bleeding chest. "You okay, Rai?" asked, his voice tight with concern. I nodded, though I was far from okay. "We need to follow it," I said through gritted teeth. "It's hurt. We can't let it get away." Rai looked like he wanted to argue, to insist we get my wounds looked at first. But he knew, as well as I did, that this might be our only chance to catch this thing, to figure out what the hell was going on in our forest. We followed the blood trail, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The trail led us deeper into the forest, to parts that even I, with all my years of experience, had never seen before. The trees here seemed older, and twisted in ways that didn't look natural. The blood trail ended at the mouth of a cave, half hidden by thick underbrush. A foul odor wafted from the opening, a mixture of wet fur, rotting meat, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. Rai and I exchanged a look. We both knew what we had to do, even if every instinct was screaming at us to turn back, to call for more backup. I took a deep breath, ignoring the pain in my chest, and stepped into the cave. The beam of my flashlight seemed to be swallowed up by the darkness, barely illuminating a few feet in front of me. I could hear Ray's steady breathing behind me, the only reassuring sound in this nightmare. We moved deeper into the cave, the smell getting stronger with each step, and then my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. Bones, piles of them scattered across the cave floor. Some looked old, bleached, white by time. Others were fresher, a low growl echoed through the cave, and I swung my flashlight towards the sound. There in the back of the cave was the creature. It was crouched low, its yellow, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Blood matted its fur both from its wound and other sources. "Tommy," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tommy, are you here?" The creature's only response was another growl, deeper this time. It tensed, ready to spring now. I shouted, diving to the side as Ray opened fire. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the cave, the muzzle flashes, briefly illuminating the horrific scene. Around us, the creature roared in pain and fury, charging towards us with terrifying speed. I rolled, coming up on one knee, and fired my shot, caught it in the shoulder, causing it to stumble. Ray kept firing each shot, finding its mark. The creature stumbled again, then fell. It tried to rise, letting out a sound that was almost human, a sound of pain and confusion and rage. I approached cautiously, my rifle trained on its massive head, its yellow eyes locked onto mine. And for a moment I saw something there, not just animal fury, but intelligence, awareness. Then the light in its eyes dimmed and it was gone. We stood there for a long moment, our harsh breathing the only sound in the cave. Then Rai broke the silence. "What the hell is this thing?" he asked, his voice shaky. I shook my head. "I don't know, but we need to report this. Get a team in here." As if on cue, our radios crackled to life. The rest of the search team had heard the gunshots and were converging on our location. The next few hours were a blur. We led the team to the cave, watched as they documented everything, bagged up the bones for analysis. The creature's body was carefully removed to be taken to a lab for study, and Tommy, we found what was left of him in the back of the cave. It wasn't much. The official report called it an animal attack, a rogue bear driven to unusual behavior by hunger or disease. But Rai and I knew the truth. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't any bear we'd ever seen. In the years that followed, I heard whispers, stories of other encounters in other forests of creatures that didn't quite fit into any known category. Most people dismissed these as tall tales, urban legends, but I knew better. I had the scars to prove it. I stayed with the Forest Service for another decade after that night, but I never went into the deep woods alone again. And on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I sometimes think I can hear that roar again, that sound of fury and pain and something almost human. And I wonder what else is out there hiding in the shadows of our forests. The year was 2008, and I was working the night shift as a security guard at a remote research station up in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. State. It was the kind of place you'd see in sci-fi movies, but instead of hunting aliens, these scientists were studying climate change and environmental phenomena. My name's Henry Little Bear. I grew up on the Yakima Reservation and did a few tours in the Marines before drifting into security work. When I got out, the pay was decent, and I figured keeping tabs on a bunch of scientists couldn't be that difficult. Evenings were mostly quiet, checking security cameras, walking the perimeter, that sort of thing. The only excitement I ever got was when the odd critter triggered a motion sensor. One crisp October night, things started to get weird. I was doing my rounds when I noticed one of the outbuildings at storage shed used for old gear was unlocked. Strange, I was sure I'd locked it just an hour before. Maybe one of the scientists had needed something and forgot to shut it. I shrugged, pulled out my flashlight and cautiously approached. The shed inside it was a mess. Shelves were overturned like somebody had gone through it in a hurry. Frowning, I stepped over the debris to get a closer look. That's when I saw the blood, a whole lot of it, splashes on the floor, streaks leading out the other door. My heart started to pound. Something wasn't right. Here I radioed to the main facility, my voice tight. Something's happened at storage shed 3. There might have been an accident. They patched me through to the head of security, who sounded less than pleased to be woken up. He told me to wait for backup, to not touch anything. Great, like that was comforting with nothing else to do. I cautiously followed the blood trail. It led out into the woods away from the facility. I figured this was now a job for the police, but something kept me going. There was a part of me, maybe that old Marine instinct, that knew somebody out there might need help. The deeper I got into the woods, the darker it became. The blood trail was getting harder to follow. I reached for my flashlight just as a twig snapped. Behind me, I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest was silent, probably just a deer, I told myself. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I continued forward, my footsteps muffled by the damp, fallen leaves. The blood trail led me to a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. Crouched in the clearing, partially obscured by the shadows, was a massive creature bigger than any bear I'd ever encountered, its fur ragged and patchy in the moonlight. Its posture was all wrong, limbs impossibly long, and its muzzle, it was like a wolf, but something wasn't right. Too long, the teeth glistening unnaturally. Beside the creature lay the body of one of the scientists, a young woman I'd seen around the facility. My stomach turned, rage surged through me. I should have listened to my instincts, call for help when I had the chance. She might still be alive. The creature was hunched over its prey, tearing into the body. I swallowed back the fear and raised my sidearm. I never had to shoot at anything other than paper targets before, but it was either this creature or me. My first shot echoed through the trees, hitting the creature in the shoulder. It roared, a blood-curdling sound that sent shivers down my spine. The creature reared up taller than me and then charged. I fired again and again, the recoil jolting my arm. The creature stumbled, but it kept coming. Terror flooded through me. I was out of ammo. I turned and ran, scrambling through the underbrush. The creature was gaining, its arid breaths almost in my ears. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the trees. Up ahead, I saw a drop off a ravine leading down to the river. It was my only chance. I took a desperate leap. The ground rushed up to meet me. I hit the slope of the ravine hard and tumbled, my body battered by rocks and branches. I landed with a sickening thud at the bottom of the frigid river, just a few feet away. Groaning, I tried to move, but a wave of pain washed over me. I'd broken something, leg or ribs, maybe both. Lying there helpless, I listened. There was no sign of the creature. Maybe it hadn't followed me, or maybe it was just circling above, waiting for me to die. I forced myself to crawl towards the river. I managed to scoop up handfuls of the icy water and splash it on my face. The shock of it helped me focus, dying out. Here wasn't an option. I looked back up. The ravine, climbing it was impossible. Not in my condition. The river was my only way out. The water was freezing, but I figured the current would carry me downstream, where hopefully I'd find a road or signs of civilization mustering. What little strength I had left, I dragged myself into the knee water and let the current take me. The cold was excruciating, but the pain helped keep me conscious. The river twisted and turned, and I lost all sense of time. My vision blurred, but I clung to a desperate hope. That help was waiting just around. The next bend, hours later, the sun started to break through the trees. I was beyond shivering, my body going numb. There was a roaring in my ears, and blackness started creeping in at the edges of my vision. And then I saw it, a bridge with a final burst of adrenaline. I fought against the current, struggling. Towards the bank, I reached out, my fingers scraping against rough wood. I fumbled for a grip and managed to pull myself to safety, collapsing on the muddy riverbank. A truck rumbled over the bridge just as everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed. Days later, the doctor told me some hikers found me unconscious under the bridge, suffering from hypothermia and a broken leg. In several places I told him about the creature, about the scientist, but he gave me a sad smile, the same look you reserve for crazy people. The police investigated. Of course, search and rescue scoured the woods, but there was no sign of the scientist's body or any creature matching my description. They wrote it off as a bear attack. I somehow miraculously survived, or maybe just a bad case of hallucinations. I was released after weeks of physical therapy. I never went back to that research station, found a different line of work, tried to put it all behind me, but it's been years, and I haven't forgotten. Sometimes, late at night, I wake in a cold sweat and think I hear something scratching at my window. During those sleepless hours, I tell myself that what I saw that night was impossible. Figment of my imagination, fueled by terror and shock. But then again, part of me wonders, the wild places are vast and full of mysteries. Old stories get passed down for a reason, even those that sound like monster tales. And if creatures like the one I saw, creatures the scientists would call cryptids, exist on the fringes of our world, well, let's just say I sleep with a gun under my pillow now. Maybe the truth is that some old stories, the ones about skinwalkers and other shape-shifting, shadow-dwelling creatures, are based on something horrifyingly real, something we might never fully understand, something that reminds us that even in this modern world, the wilderness still holds secrets, and some secrets have very sharp teeth. As the years passed, I tried to move on with my life. I left the security business altogether and took up carpentry, working with my hands, creating tangible things, helped ground me in reality. But no matter how much sawdust I breathed in or how many calluses I developed, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I started researching at first just to prove to myself that I had imagined it all, delved into local legends, Native American folklore, and even fringe cryptozoology websites. What I found didn't reassure me. There were stories scattered across time and cultures of creatures that seemed eerily similar to what I had encountered. The Wendo of Algonquin legend, the skinwalkers of Navajo lore, even the old European tales of werewolves. They all spoke of beings that straddled the line between human and beast, creatures that hungered for human flesh and could move with impossible speed and strength. I reached out to a few people who claimed to have had similar encounters. Most were clearly delusional or seeking attention, but few had a look in their eyes that I recognized the haunted gaze of someone who's seen something they can't explain, something that shakes the very foundation of their reality one night. About 5 years after my encounter, I received an email from a man claiming to be a former employee at the research station. He said he had heard rumors about my experience and wanted to meet against my better judgment. I agreed. We met at a quiet diner just outside of Seattle. The man who introduced himself as Dr. Robert Keller was in his 60s with a neat grey beard and piercing blue eyes. He ordered coffee for both of us and then leaned in close. "Mr. Little Bear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I believe what you saw that night was real. And I think I know why it was there." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" Dr. Keller took a deep breath. "The official story is that the research station was studying climate change. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. There was another project, highly classified. We were investigating anomalies. Anomalies, I repeated, confused. Unexplained phenomena, sightings of creatures that shouldn't exist. Electromagnetic disturbances, time dilation, affects things that defied conventional scientific explanation." I felt my heart rate increasing. "And you found something?" Dr. Keller nodded slowly. "We discovered, well, we're not sure what to call them, weak points, maybe places where the fabric of reality seems thinner, where things from elsewhere can sometimes slip through." I sat back, my mind reeling. "Are you saying that creature came from another dimension or something possibly? Or maybe it's always been here, hiding in the spaces between what we perceive as reality? The point is, Mr. Little Bear, you're not crazy. What you saw was real, and it's not the only one. Out there, we talked for hours. Dr. Keller told me about other incidents, other sightings. He explained how the government had been covering up these occurrences for decades, fearing mass panic if the truth got out. By the time we parted ways, my head was spinning with new information. In the weeks that followed, I found myself unable to let it go. I started taking camping trips into the Cascades, telling myself I was just enjoying nature, but always with an eye out for anything unusual. I upgraded my camera, bought night vision goggles, and even invested in some motion-activated trail cams for months. Nothing happened. I began to wonder if Dr. Keller had been pulling my leg, or if perhaps he was as delusional as the people I dismissed earlier. But then on a crisp autumn night, much like the one when I'd had my first encounter, everything changed. I was camped near a small lake, miles from the nearest road. Around midnight, I was awoken by a strange humming sound. At first, I thought it might be Idis, but as I became more alert, I realized it was coming from outside my tent. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. What I saw defied explanation. The lake was rippling, not from wind or fish, but as if the very surface was undulating, like fabric in a breeze, and hovering above the center of the lake was a swirling mass of light pulsating with colors I couldn't even name. I fumbled for my camera, my hands shaking so badly I could barely operate it. As I watched through the viewfinder, something began to emerge from the light. It was hard to focus on, like my eyes couldn't quite process what they were seeing. It seemed to shift and change one moment, looking almost human the next, like some kind of insectoid creature. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light winked out the thing, whatever it was, dropped into the lake with a splash. The water settled and everything was still. Sat there for hours, my camera trained on the lake, waiting for something else to happen. But as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized that the show was over. When I got home, I immediately checked my camera to my dismay. Most of the photos were blurry or completely black, but one, just one, showed a clear image of the light over the lake. It wasn't proof, not really, but it was something. I sent the photo to Dr. Keller, along with a detailed account of what I'd seen. His reply was brief but excited. He wanted to meet again, said he had more to tell me, but the day before our scheduled meeting, I received another email. This one was from an address I didn't recognize. The message was short. They know you've seen. Be careful. Trust no one. I tried to contact Dr. Keller, but his phone was disconnected and my emails bounced back. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've been careful. I've moved several times, always looking over my shoulder. I don't know who they are. Government agents, other researchers, or maybe something else entirely. But I know I'm being watched. I've continued my research, but quietly, I've made connections with others who've had similar experiences, built a network of people seeking the truth. We're careful communicating through encrypted channels and meeting only in secure locations. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just forgotten about that night in the woods, if I should have accepted the official explanation and moved on with my life. But I can't, not now that I know what's out there. The world is stranger and more dangerous than most people realize. There are things lurking in the shadows, things that defy our understanding of reality, and somewhere out there that creature or others, like it is still hunting. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day we'll find definitive proof, something that will force the world to acknowledge the truth, or maybe we'll all be silenced, our discoveries buried along with us. But for now, I'll keep searching, keep watching, because someone has to stand guard at the edge of reality, ready to face whatever might come through from the other side. As I sit here typing this account, I can't help but glance nervously at the windows. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soon it will be dark, and in the darkness, anything can happen. If you're reading this, be aware, be vigilant. The world is not what you think it is, and the night is full of terrors. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the vast Navajo reservation in hues of orange and purple, as I pulled my battered pickup into the gravel lot of the trading post. It was 1993, and the world seemed to be changing faster than I could keep up. But here in this remote corner of Arizona, time seemed to move at its own pace. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The trading post was a lifeline for many on the reservation, a place where necessities, gossip, and occasional work could be found. I needed all three. As I stepped out of the truck, the dry heat hit me like a physical force. Dust swirled around my boots, a constant companion in this arid landscape. The trading post was a weathered wooden structure, its paint peeling under the relentless sun. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. Stepping into the dim interior, the smell hit me first, a mixture of leather, tobacco, and something indefinably old. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to handcrafted jewelry behind the counter. stood a stout woman with greying hair, pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto me as I approached to help you. She asked, her voice gruff but not unkind. I cleared my throat. Throat name's Joshua Treehorn. I'm looking for work, anything at all. She sized me up, her gaze lingering on my worn boots and faded jeans. I knew what. She saw a man down on his luck, desperate for any opportunity, but I held her gaze, refusing to flinch under her scrutiny. You any good with horses, Mr. Treehorn? She finally asked. I nodded, perhaps a bit too eagerly. One of the best, I assured her, though it had been years since I'd sat in a saddle. The Ellie tasted bitter on my tongue, but desperation has a way of loosening one's morals. She pursed her lips, considering. I got a fellow who might take you on, but he's particular. Can you handle the quiet? I almost laughed. Quiet was all I'd known for months. I can handle it, I said simply. She gave me another long look, then seemed to come to a decision. All right, she said, reaching for a scrap of paper. Head north toward Shiprock. About 10 miles out, you'll see a big old white ranch house with a horse barn behind it. Name's Walter. Duncan. Tell him Loretta sent you. I pocketed the paper, nodding my thanks as I turned to leave. Loretta's voice stopped me. Mr. Treehorn, she said, her tone softer. Now be careful out there, Walter. Duncan, well, he's got some strange ideas, but he pays fair and he needs the help. I nodded again, wondering what exactly I was getting myself into, but beggars can't be choosers, and I was most definitely begging. The drive north was a solitary one. Nothing but endless stretches of red rock and scrub brush for company. As the miles ticked by, I found my mind wandering, replaying the series of events that had led me to this point. I'd grown up on the reservation, left for college with big dreams, only to return a decade later with my tail between my legs. The world outside had chewed me up and spit me out, leaving me with nothing but a useless degree and a mountain of debt. Coming back had felt like failure, but it was the only option left. The sun was setting by the time I spotted the ranch house. Loretta had described it was an imposing structure, 2 stories of weathered white wood standing stark against the darkening sky behind it. I could make out the silhouette of a large barn. As I pulled up the long driveway, I noticed something odd. The pastures on either side were full of horses, more horses than any working ranch would need. They seemed restless, pacing the fence lines and tossing their heads. A shiver ran down my spine, though I couldn't say why. I parked in front of the house and climbed out of the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. The porch light flickered on and a tall, lean figure stepped out onto the porch. Mr. Duncan, I called out, approaching cautiously. Loretta at the trading post sent me. I'm here about the work. The man on the porch didn't move, didn't speak. As I got closer, I could make out his features in the dim light. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. Those eyes fixed on me with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. You Navajo? He asked abruptly. I nodded. Yes, sir, Joshua Treehorn. He grunted, then turned and walked back into the house without another word. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. The interior of the house was as strange as its owner. Taxidermy lined the walls, not just the usual deer heads and fish, but more exotic specimens. A snarling mountain lion crouched in one corner, while the glassy eyes of various birds of prey seemed to follow my movements. The air was thick with the smell of leather and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Duncan led me into a cluttered living room and gestured for me to sit in a worn armchair. He remained, standing looming over me like a judge. About to pass sentence, Loretta says, "You're good with horses," he said, without preamble. I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Yes, sir, been around them all my life." He made a non-committal sound. "And what about the other things? The things that aren't horses?" I blinked, not sure I'd heard him correctly. "I'm sorry." Duncan's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Treehorn, you believe in things you can't see?" A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard stories about Walter. Duncan whispered rumors in the trading post and around campfires. Some said he was touched in the head, others that he knew things, saw things that normal folks couldn't. I dismissed it all as superstition and gossip. Now face to face with the man himself, I wasn't so sure. The old stories, I said carefully, some truth in them, I suppose. Spirit skin. Walkers, maybe? Duncan nodded, a fierce light coming into his eyes. "Not stories," he said, his voice low and intense. "Things out there in the darkness. Things that don't follow the rules." He started to pace, his boots thumping against the hardwood floor. "Something's been at my herd," he continued. "Killing horses, not for food, for sport almost. Leaves them torn up insides. On the outside, I felt my stomach turn mountain. Lion, maybe," I suggested weakly. Duncan shook his head violently. "No cat I've ever seen could do what's been done to my horses. This thing, it ain't natural." He stopped pacing and fixed me with that piercing stare again. "You want work? Treehorn, here it is. Help me find what's killing my horses. Help me stop it." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to get up, walk out, and never look back, but the thought of returning to the trading post, empty, handed of admitting defeat, yet again, was too much to bear. "All right," he heard myself say. "I'll help." Duncan nodded, seemingly satisfied. "We start at first. Light, there's a room upstairs you can use. Get some rest. You'll need it." As I climbed the creaking stairs to the spare room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just made a terrible mistake, but it was too late to back out now. Whatever was waiting for me in the morning, I'd have to face it head on. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a narrow bed and a chest of drawers that had seen better days. A single window looked out over the pastures where the horses still paced restlessly in the moonlight. I collapsed onto the bed, not bothering to undress, and fell into a fitful sleep. My dreams were chaotic, filled with shadowy figures and the sound of galloping hooves. I woke with a start, just as the first rays of dawn were creeping through the window. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and I groaned. I made my way downstairs, following the smell of coffee. Duncan was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming mug in front of him. He nodded towards the pot. "Help yourself," he grunted. I poured myself a cup and sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Duncan pushed back his chair and stood. "Time to see what we're dealing with," he said. We headed out to the barn, the morning air crisp and cool. The horses were calmer, now grazing peacefully in the early light. But as we approached the far end of the pasture, their demeanor changed. They backed away, snorting and tossing their heads. "Here," Duncan said, pointing to a spot just beyond the fence. I looked where he was indicating and felt my blood run cold. The ground was torn up, great furrows carved into the earth, as if by massive claws, and there, in the center of the destruction, lay the mangled remains of what had once been a horse. I'd seen dead animals before. Growing up on the reservation, it was just a part of life. But this was something else entirely. The horse had been ripped apart, its flesh shredded, and its bones splintered the ground around. It was soaked with blood. Jesus, I breathed, fighting the urge to be sick. Duncan's face was grim. Told you it wasn't natural, he said. Whatever did this, it ain't no mountain lion, ain't nothing I've ever seen before. I knelt down, examining the tracks around the carcass. They were unlike anything I'd ever encountered, massive prints, but distorted, somehow as if the creature that made them was constantly shifting its shape. What do you think it is? I asked, standing up and wiping my hands on my jeans. Duncan's eyes were fixed on the horizon. There's old stories, he said slowly. Things that walk between worlds, shape, shifters, skinwalkers, some call them. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air, the old stories, the ones my grandmother used to tell. I'd always thought they were just that, stories, but looking at the carnage before me, I wasn't so sure anymore. So what do we do? I asked. Duncan turned to me, his eyes hard. We hunt it, he said simply, before it kills again. The next few days fell into a grim routine. We'd spend our mornings checking the perimeter of the ranch, looking for signs of the creatures. Return afternoons were devoted to research. Duncan had a surprisingly extensive library on Navajo folklore, and cryptozoology evenings found us sitting on the porch, rifles across our laps, watching the shadows lengthen across the land. Despite the circumstances, I found myself warming to Duncan. He was gruff and taciturn, but there was a sharp intelligence behind those piercing eyes. And as the days wore on, he began to open up, sharing stories of his life on the ranch and the strange occurrences he'd witnessed over the years. Been here 40 years, he told me one evening as we sat watching the sunset, seeing things that would turn a man's hair white overnight, but nothing like this. Nothing this malevolent. I nodded, sipping from the mug of coffee in my hands. You ever think about leaving? I asked. Duncan snorted. And go where this is my home. My responsibility. Can't just run away, 'cause things get tough. His words hit close to home, reminding me of my own flight from the reservation years ago. I'd run when things got tough, and look where it had gotten me, as if reading my thoughts. Duncan spoke again. What about you, Treehorn? What brought you back to the I sighed, staring out at the darkening landscape. Thought I could make it in the outside world. I said, turns out the outside world didn't much care for me. Duncan grunted. World out there, it's got its own kind of monsters, different from what we're dealing with here, but just as dangerous in their own way. We lapsed into silence after that, each lost in our own thoughts. As the last light faded from the sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness beyond the porch. Light's reach. It was 3 nights later that everything came to a head. I was jolted awake by the sound of gunshots and horses screaming. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing the rifle Duncan had given me, and raced downstairs. Duncan was already on the porch, his own rifle raised there. He shouted, pointing towards the far pasture. At first I couldn't see anything in the darkness, Then the clouds parted, moonlight spilling across the land, and I saw it. It was huge, easily the size of a bear, but it moved with a fluid grace that no bear could match. Its form seemed to shift and change as it moved, sometimes appearing almost human, other times more like a massive wolf, but its eyes glowed with an unholy red light that seared itself into my brain. Duncan fired again, the sound deafening in the still night air. The creature let out a howl that made my blood run cold, a sound that was neither human nor animal, but something in between. "We've got to draw it away from the horses," Duncan yelled, already moving towards the barn. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. We ran towards the creature, firing as we went. Our bullets seemed to have little effect. They slowed it down, but didn't stop it. As we got closer, I could smell it, a rank, musky odor that burned my nostrils. The creature turned towards us, its red eyes fixing on me with terrifying intents. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I was aware of everything: the cool night air on my skin, the weight of the rifle in my hands, the thundering of my own heartbeat. Then the creature charged. What followed was a blur of violence and terror. We fought and ran and fought, leading the creature away from the horses and towards the rocky outcroppings at the edge of Duncan's property. Our rifles were soon empty, reduced to makeshift clubs. As we battled for our lives, I lost track of time, aware only of the desperate struggle for survival. At some point, I found myself separated from Duncan, backed up against a sheer rock, faced with the creature advancing on me. Its form had stabilized now into something vaguely wolf-like, but larger and more nightmarish than any wolf I'd ever seen. Saliva dripped from its massive jaws as it stalked towards me, clearly savoring the moment before it struck. In that moment, with death staring me in the face, something strange happened. A calm settled over me, and I heard my grandmother's voice in my head, reciting an old prayer without conscious thought. I began to speak the words aloud. The creature hesitated, cocking its head. As if confused, I continued the prayer, my voice growing stronger with each word. And then, to my amazement, the creature began to back away. A shot rang out, and the creature yelped in pain. Duncan emerged from the shadows, his face bloodied but triumphant. "The old ways," he said, nodding approvingly. "Should have known together." We advanced on the mass, creature, me reciting the prayer, and Duncan firing his reloaded rifle with each word, and each shot the creature seemed to diminish its form, becoming less substantial. Finally, with a howl that seemed to shake the very ground, it dissolved into a cloud of inky black smoke. The smoke swirled for a moment, then dissipated on the night breeze. We stood there for a long moment, panting and disbelieving. Then Duncan clapped me on the shoulder. "Well done, Treehorn," he said. "Reckon you've earned your pay." And then some, as we limped back towards the ranch house. I felt a profound sense of change. I'd faced something beyond my understanding and survived more than that. I'd reconnected with a part of myself I thought I'd left behind. The part that believed in the old ways, the old stories. Duncan offered me a permanent job on the ranch, which I accepted. Over the years that followed, we faced other challenges, other creatures that defied explanation, but none ever quite matched that first terrifying encounter. I still live on the reservation, still work with Duncan on The ranch, the years have weathered us. Both, but they've also forged a bond. Stronger than blood, we become the keepers of a secret legacy, guardians against the things that lurk in the shadows of our world. The encounter with the Skinwalker changed me in ways I'm still coming to understand. It awakened something dormant inside me, a connection to the old ways that I'd thought lost. I found myself seeking out the elders, learning the prayers and rituals I'd once dismissed as superstition. In time, I became known as something of a medicine man myself, though I wear the title. Uncomfortably, life on the reservation isn't easy. We face the same challenges, always poverty, addiction, the struggle to preserve our culture in a world that seems determined to erase it. But there's a strength here too, a resilience that runs as deep as the red rocks that surround us. Duncan and I still patrol the boundaries of the ranch, though these days it's more often in his battered old truck than on horseback. Our eyes are always scanning the horizon, watching for signs of things that don't belong. Most nights are quiet, but every so often we'll catch a glimpse of something moving just at the edge of our vision, or hear a howl that makes the horses stamp and snort nervously. On those nights we sit on the porch with our rifles across our laps, just like we did all those years ago. Sometimes we talk, sharing stories or discussing the latest reservation gossip. More often, we sit in comfortable silence, two old warriors standing guard against an enemy most people don't even know exists. I've had opportunities to over the years job offers from off the reservation, chances to make more money or live an easier life, but I always decline this place, this life. It's a part of me now, as surely as the blood in my veins or the air in my lungs. There are times, usually in the quiet hours, just before dawn, when I find myself thinking about that night, about the creature we faced and the narrow margin by which we survived. I wonder if it was truly unique, or if there are more of its kind out there waiting in the darkness. I wonder if we'll be ready when the next one comes. But then the sun rises, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and I'm reminded of the beauty that surrounds us. The horses nickering softly in their pastures, the scent of sage on the morning breeze, the distant call of a hawk riding the thermals. These are the things that make this harsh land home. As I write these words, I can hear Duncan moving around in the kitchen, probably brewing another pot of his impossibly strong coffee. Soon we'll head out to check the fences and tend to the horses, just as we've done nearly every day for the past 30 years. I don't know what the future holds. The world is changing faster than ever, and sometimes it feels like our way of life is hanging by a thread, but we endure as we always have. We adapt, we persevere, and we keep watch, for we are the guardians of the threshold, the keepers of ancient knowledge. We stand between two worlds, the mundane and the mystical, the seen and the unseen. And as long as we draw breath, we will continue to protect this land and its people from the darkness that lurks just beyond the firelight. So, if you find yourself driving through the Navajo Nation and you see an old ranch house standing proud against the setting, sun, spare a thought for the two old men who live there. We may not look like much, but we've seen things that would turn your hair white, and we stand ready to face them again. For this is our home, our responsibility, and come what may, we will defend it to our last breath. The scorching Texas sun had just dipped below the horizon when I first glimpsed something that would haunt me for years to come. It was the summer of '94, and I was working as a ranch hand at the Lona Ranch about 20 miles outside of Marfa. Name's Rusty, by the way. Rusty McCoy. I'd been working ranches since I was old enough to throw a lasso, but there was something different about this place. Maybe it was the vastness of it, all thousands of acres of sun-baked earth, stretching as far as the eye could see. Or maybe it was the stories I'd heard, whispered around town about strange lights in the sky and unexplained phenomena. Either way, I never expected to witness anything stranger than a coyote with mange. That particular night, I was out checking fences. The boss old man, Johnson, was paranoid about tourists leaving gates open and letting the cattle wander. It was mindless work, but I didn't mind. There was something peaceful about being out there under the stars. Nothing but the occasional cry of a coyote to break the silence I'd been at it for hours, when I saw something that made me pull up short. Way off in the distance down by the old windmill, I spotted lights. At first I figured it was just headlights from the highway, but they weren't moving, just hanging there in the darkness like fireflies frozen in time. A chill ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the night air. This was no highway car. That much was certain. My heart started pounding, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the old rifle I kept in the truck, more for snakes than anything else, and started making my way towards the lights on foot. The moon was just a sliver that night, casting everything in an eerie silvery glow. As I got closer, I could make out the outline of an old pickup parked by the windmill. That's when things started getting real strange. Crouched near the truck's headlights was a figure, a man, I thought at first, but there was something off about the way he moved. It was jerky, frantic, almost inhuman. He was hunched over, clawing at the desert sand like a man possessed. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn tail and run, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the bizarre scene unfolding before me. Finding a scraggly musquet bush to hide behind, I watched. The whole time he was digging, the fellow was muttering under his breath. At first, it was too soft to make out, but as I strained my ears, I caught snippets, words like hungry and lost, and something that sounded like a name, though I couldn't quite catch it. Just when I was thinking maybe I ought to hightail it out of there, I saw him pull something from the hole. It was long and wrapped in what looked like old blankets or rags. My stomach did a somersault as a horrible thought crossed my mind. Could it be a body? The figure stumbled to his feet, clutching the bundle tight to his chest. That's when I noticed the blood. Even in the dim light, I could see that the front of his shirt was soaked, dark stains gleaming wetly in the moonlight. This wasn't just sweat or dirt. This was something far more sinister. He lurched towards the truck, movements still jerky and unnatural as he threw open the passenger side door. I got my first clear look at what he was carrying. It wasn't a bundle at all. It was a woman. Her face was deathly, pale eyes wide open and staring at nothing. There was a gash on her throat so deep it looked like she'd been nearly decapitated. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to keep from retching. My whole body was shaking, but I knew I had to do something. The man was about to get in the truck. Maybe he hadn't noticed me yet. I raised the rifle, trying to steady my trembling hands. That's when he whipped around, head turning in my direction with inhuman Speed, his eyes caught the dim light, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. They were wild, filled with a hunger that was pure animal. In that moment, I knew I wasn't dealing with anything human. He let out a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a scream that made every hair on my body stand on end. Then he lunged towards me with terrifying speed. I panicked and squeezed the trigger. The muaj sound of the shot echoed across the empty desert, shattering the eerie silence. I didn't wait to see if I'd hit him. I was already running my legs, pumping harder than they ever had in my life. I could hear him behind me, that inhuman growling getting closer by the second. My lungs were burning my legs. Felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. I reached my truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine roared to life just as I caught a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, a dark shape hurtling towards me with impossible speed. I slammed on the gas, tires kicking up a cloud of dust as I tore out of there. I didn't stop driving until I hit the nearest town with a gas station the whole way. I was convinced he was right behind me, hiding in the shadows, watching my every move. When I finally pulled into the brightly lit parking lot, I nearly wept with relief. My hands were still shaking as I dialed the big sheriff's office from the payphone. I stammered out my story, knowing how insane it must have sounded. To their credit, they took me seriously enough to send out a couple of deputies to check it out. They searched the area around the windmill but found nothing. No body, no blood, not even the shell casings from my rifle. They gave me that look, the one that said they thought I was just another crazy desert rat seeing things that weren't there. Part of me wanted to believe that's all it was, a hallucination brought on by too many hours in the sun maybe. But I knew what I'd seen, the memory of those inhuman eyes, the grotesque wound on the woman's throat. It was all too vivid, too real to be a figment of my imagination. I quit my job at the ranch the next day, couldn't bear the thought of going back out there, of possibly encountering that thing again. Packed up my meager belongings and headed east, looking for work somewhere far from the vast empty spaces of West Texas. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen that night. It followed me, creeping into my dreams, making me start at every shadow I found, myself unable to trust the darkness, always wondering what might be lurking just beyond the reach of the light years passed. And I tried to convince myself it had all been a mistake, a trick of the light and an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was something out there in that wide, lonely desert, something that defied explanation, something that had no place in the rational world. I thought I knew. I've never told this story to anyone else who would believe me, but I'm getting older now, and I can feel my time growing short. I need someone to know what happened out there, even if they dismiss it as the ramblings of a sour old man. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind is howling and the shadows seem to move of their own accord, I find myself wondering, is it still out there? That thing I saw, is it still hunting, still hungry? And how many others have encountered it in the years since their stories going untold, their fates unknown? I don't have answers to these questions. All I know is what I saw that night in the summer of the 94, out in the vast emptiness of the Texas desert. And I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation. Things that lurk in the darkness, just beyond the edge of what we understand. So, if you ever find yourself driving through West Texas and you see lights out in the desert where no light should be, don't investigate. Don't let curiosity get the better of you, like it did me. Just keep driving and pray that whatever's out there doesn't take notice of you, because once you've seen what I've seen, there's no going back. The world never looks quite the same again. And the darkness, well, the darkness becomes a whole lot darker the years roll by. But the memory of that night never faded. I drifted from job to job, never staying in one place too long. Something in me had changed, like a spring wound too tight. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in crowded cities far from the desert. It was in the fall of 2008 when I found myself back in Texas. I hadn't planned on returning, but a series of dead-end jobs and bad luck had led me there. I was working as a night watchman at a warehouse in El Paso, a job that suited my newfound aversion to sleep. One night, as I was making my rounds, I overheard two of the truckers talking. They were discussing a series of disappearances out near Marfa. My blood ran cold as I listened to them describe how folks had gone missing without a trace, their vehicles found abandoned on lonely stretches of highway. I couldn't help myself. I asked them for more details, trying to keep my voice casual. Even as my heart raced, they were happy to oblige, clearly relieved to have someone to share the gossip with. It's the strange thing. One of them said, a weathered old-timer with a face like tanned leather, people just vanishing into thin air. No bodies, no evidence of foul play. It's like the desert just swallowed him up. The other trucker, a younger man with tattoos crawling up his arms, nodded solemnly. My cousin's deputy out that way says they found some of the vehicles, but never any trace of the people. And get this, in some of the cars they found claw marks on the inside, like something was trying to get in. I felt the blood drain from my face. Claw marks, the image of those inhuman hands digging frantically in the desert sand, flashed through my mind. The older trucker must have noticed my reaction. He gave me a curious look. "You all right there, buddy? You're looking a mite pale." I mumbled something about not feeling well and quickly excused myself. My mind was reeling. Could it be the same thing I'd encountered all those years ago? Had it been out there all this time? Hunting the rest of my shift passed in a blur. By the time dawn broke, I'd made a decision. I had to go back. I had to know if what I'd seen that night in '94 was connected to these disappearances. I quit my job that morning and hit the road, heading west towards Marfa. The closer I got, the more my anxiety grew. What was I doing? I'd spent years trying to forget what I'd seen, and now I was driving straight back into it. But I couldn't turn back. I needed answers, even if they terrified me. I rolled into Marfa late in the afternoon, the town looking much the same as I remembered it. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, planning to start my investigation in. The morning sleep didn't come easy that night. Every sound had me on edge. The hum of the ancient air conditioner, the occasional passing car, the wind whistling through the gaps in the window frame. When I finally did drift off, my dream were filled with dark shapes and hungry eyes. The next morning, I headed to the local diner. If there was one thing I remembered about small towns, it was that the diner was always the best place to get information. I settled into a booth, ordered coffee, and struck up a conversation with the waitress. She was a friendly, sort middle-aged with laugh. Lines around her eyes. Heard there's been some trouble around these parts, I said, casually, as she refilled my cup. People going missing. Her smile faltered for a moment. Oh, you heard about that? Yeah, it's been rough. Folks are scared, you know. Nobody knows what's happening to these people. I nodded sympathetically. Any theories? She glanced around, then leaned in closer. Well, don't go spreading this around, but some folks are saying it's not human. Sheriff thinks it's just some serial killer, but I don't know the things I've heard. It don't sound like any person I've ever known. My throat went dry. What kind of things? She lowered her voice even further. Well, there's this rancher lives out past the old Johnson's place. Says he saw something out there one night. Described it as a man, but not a man. Said it moved all wrong, like its joints were put together backwards, and its eyes, she shuddered, said they glowed in the dark, like some kind of animal. I must have gone pale because she reached out and patted my hand. Oh, don't you worry, honey. It's probably just stories. You know how folks can exaggerate. I forced a smile and thanked her, but my mind was racing. It sounded too similar to what I'd seen. This wasn't just coincidence. Over the next few days, I talked to anyone who would listen. Most folks were tight-lipped, clearly spooked by the disappearances. But bit by bit, I started to piece together a pattern. The disappearances always happened at night, usually on the outskirts of town or on lonely street stretches of highway. Sometimes there were reports of strange lights, similar to what I'd seen that night by the windmill, and always there was that sense of otherworldly wrongness that I remembered all too well. It was on my fourth night in Marfa that things took a turn. I was driving back to my motel after spending the evening at the local bar, trying to loosen some tongues with a few rounds of drinks. The road was dark, lit only by my headlights and the last canopy of stars overhead. That's when I saw it, a flicker of light off to the side of the road, just like that night in 94. My heart started pounding, every instinct screaming at me to keep driving. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pulled over, killed the engine, and sat there for a long moment trying to gather my courage. Then, with shaking hands, I reached for the flashlight I kept in the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The desert night was cool, a light breeze carrying the scent of sage and dust. I swept my flashlight beam across the landscape, searching for the source of the light I'd seen. At first I saw nothing, just scrub brush and cacti there, shadows long and distorted in the harsh beam of my flashlight. Then, just as I was about to give up and head back to my car, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. There, partially hidden behind a large boulder, was a vehicle. As I drew closer, I realized it was an old pickup truck, not unlike the one I'd seen that night all those years ago. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the flashlight steady. I approached the truck slowly, every step an effort of will. As I rounded the boulder, the beam of my flashlight fell on something that stopped me in my tracks. The driver's side door was open, and there on the seat was a dark stain. Even in the harsh glare of the flashlight, I could tell it was blood. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was it. This was real. Whatever I'd seen all those years ago, it was still out here, still hunting. That's when I heard it, a sound that made Every hair on my body stand on end. It was a low guttural growl, but there was something off about it. Something that didn't sound quite animal or human. I whirled around my flashlight beam, cutting through the darkness, and there, at the edge of the light, I saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me. They were unlike any eyes I'd ever seen, too large, too bright, filled with an intelligence that was decidedly not human. For a moment we stood there, frozen, me rooted to the spot with terror, and it watching, waiting. Then it moved. It was so fast I barely saw it. One moment it was at the edge of my flashlight beam. The next it was almost on top of me. I caught a glimpse of a form that was vaguely human, shaped but wrong in ways. Couldn't quite process. Limbs too long, joints bending in impossible ways, skin that seemed to shift and ripple in the moonlight. I didn't think I ran faster than I ever had in my life, fueled by a primal terror that overrode every other thought. I could hear it behind me, that inhuman growling growing louder. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. Just as I wrenched the door open, I felt something grab my ankle. I kicked out, blindly felt my foot connect with something solid. There was a hiss of pain, the most human sound I'd heard from the creature, and the grip on my ankle loosened. I threw myself into the car, slammed the door, and jammed the key into the ignition as the engine roared to life. I caught a glimpse of it in my rearview mirror for just a second. In the glow of my tail lights, I saw it clearly. It was Nightmare made flesh, a twisted parody of a human form, with elongated limbs and a face that was just wrong. But it was the eyes that haunted me. They were filled with a hunger that went beyond anything physical. It was a hunger for something I couldn't comprehend, something that chilled me to my very soul. I floored the gas pedal tires, spinning in the loose desert soil before finding purchase as I sped away. I saw it in my rearview mirror. It stood there, watching me go, making no attempt to chase. Somehow that was even more terrifying than if it had pursued me. I drove through the night, not stopping until I was well into New Mexico. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. In the years since I've tried to make sense of what I saw, I've researched, talked to experts in fields ranging from cryptozoology to quantum physics. I've even reached out to others who claim to have had similar encounters. But the truth is, I don't think we're meant to understand whatever is out there in the desert. Whatever I encountered, it's beyond our comprehension. It exists in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, in the darkness that lingers at the edges of our world. I'm an old man now, and I know my time is growing short. That's why I'm telling this story, not because I expect anyone to believe me, but because someone needs to know, someone needs to be warned. If you find yourself driving through West Texas and you see lights where no light should be, don't stop. Don't investigate. Just keep driving and pray that it doesn't take notice of you. Because once it does, you'll never truly escape. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, jumping at shadows and wondering what's really out there in the darkness. And let me tell you, that's no way to live, but it's better than the alternative. Better than ending up is just another disappearance, another mystery for folks to whisper about in diners and bars. So heed my warning if you're wise, and if you're not, well, maybe I'll see you out there in the desert someday. Just another pair of hungry eyes in the darkness, watching and waiting for the unwary to stumble into a realm, because that's the real horror of it all. Not just that these things exist, but that they can turn us into them, and in the vast empty spaces of the desert night. Who's to say where humanity ends and the monsters begin? It was just another ordinary Tuesday when my life took a turn for the extraordinary. I'm John, a regular guy with a desk job at a local insurance company. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. At least that's what I thought until that fateful night in the swamp. I remember it like it was yesterday. The clock had just struck 9:00 p.m. and I was packing up my things at the office, ready to head home after a long day of crunching numbers and dealing with clients. As I walked to my beat-up Ford pickup in the parking lot, I weighed my options for the drive home. You see, there's this shortcut I sometimes take through the Cypress Grove swamp. It's not exactly on any map, and most folks in town steer clear of it, especially after dark. But on nights when I'm running late or just too tired to deal with traffic, it's a godsend. Cuts a good 20 minutes off my commute, and I get to avoid that intersection by my apartment, where old Lady Withers takes about an hour to make a left turn. I know what you're thinking. Driving through a swamp at night, that's some horror movie level stupidity, right there. And you'd be right. But hey, we all make mistakes, right? This one just happened to be a doozy. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I made the split second decision to take the swamp route. It had been raining heavily for the past week, but I figured my trusty pickup could handle a little mud boy. Was I wrong now? Before I get into the nitty-gritty of what happened that night, let me tell you about Jerry from accounting. Jerry's this weird guy who sits 2 cubicles down from me always, eating these Arwal tuna sandwiches that stink up the whole office. But that's not the strangest thing about him. No, Jerry's got this obsession with the swamp. For months, he'd been going on and on about strange sightings in Cypress Grove, glowing red eyes in the darkness, unholy screeches echoing through the trees, the usual stuff you'd expect from a guy who spends his lunch breaks brewing suspicious looking mushroom tea. I never paid much attention to his ramblings, figured he was just into some wild conspiracy theories, or maybe that tea of his was a little more special than he let on. But as I turned onto the unmarked dirt road leading into the swamp that night, Jerry's words came floating back to me. I brushed them off, of course. I mean, come on, monsters in the swamp. This isn't some B-grade horror flick. The first few minutes of the drive were uneventful. The heavy canopy of cypress trees blocked out most of the moonlight, leaving me reliant on my headlights to navigate the twisting, muddy path. The usual sounds of the swamp, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, provided a familiar backdrop. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something was off. The path I usually took was completely flooded thanks to all that rain we'd had now. Any sensible person would have turned back at this point, but me, I decided to push on there. Had to be another way through, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. As I ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Now, swamps aren't known for smelling like a rose garden, but this was different. This was the kind of stench that makes your stomach churn and your eyes water. It was like meat left out in the sun for days, mixed with something I don't know, almost chemical. My truck started to struggle the engine, sputtering and coughing like it was about to give up the ghost. I patted the dashboard, muttering encouragements under my breath. Come on, old girl, just a little further. That's when it happened. My headlights flickered once, twice, and then died, completely plunging me into total darkness. I slammed my hand against the dashboard in frustration, as if that would magically fix the problem. Spoiler alert, it didn't. I sat there for a moment, trying to get my bearings in the pitch black. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft ticking of my cooling engine and my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it, a low rumbling growl right out inside my window. Have you ever felt true primal fear? The kind that turns your blood to ice and makes your heart feel like it's trying to punch its way out of your chest. That's what I felt in that moment. I froze, not daring to move a muscle. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. It had to be a feral hog, right? We've got plenty of those in these parts. But deep down, I knew that no hog I'd ever encountered made a sound like that. The growling, intensified, and suddenly something slammed against the driver's side door. The impact was so strong, it rocked the entire truck. I couldn't help it. I let out a yelp, my hands fumbling for the door lock, but my fingers were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Another slam against the truck, this time accompanied by the sound of metal groaning under immense pressure. Whatever was out there, it was big and strong, very strong. I groped blindly for my phone, thinking I could use it as a light source, or maybe even call for help. But when I finally found it and pressed the power button, nothing happened. The screen flickered feebly for a second, then died. Perfect, just perfect. The next sound I heard nearly made my heart stop. It was the slow, deliberate scraping of claws against metal. The creature, because at this point I was certain it wasn't any animal I was familiar with, was dragging its claws along the side of my truck. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out any details of what was attacking me. For a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of a massive silhouette hunched over my hood. It was enormous, easily dwarfing my pickup in the feeble moonlight that managed to filter through the trees. I could just barely make out leathery skin stretched tight over an oddly shaped frame, a hunched back, and long, gangly limbs that ended in what looked like massive claws. Suddenly the creature whipped around, and for a split second I swear I saw a pair of eyes glowing red. In the darkness, they were like smoldering embers burning with an otherworldly intensity that sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me, but they vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me to doubt what I just witnessed. That moment of doubt was all I needed to kickstart my survival instincts. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to wrestle the truck door open. I stumbled out, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away from whatever that thing was. I took off, running into the undergrowth, the gnarled branches of cypress trees tearing at my clothes. As I pushed through behind me, I heard an ear-splitting shriek that sounded like no earthly creature I'd ever encountered. It was followed by the sound of something immense crashing through the trees. In pursuit, I ran blindly through the swamp, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Thorns ripped at my skin in and root seemed to reach up from the ground to trip me. I had no idea where I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and that creature as possible. In my panic, I didn't notice the sudden dip in the terrain. My foot caught on something, a root of rock, who knows, and I went tumbling down what felt like a muddy incline. I rolled head over heels, unable to stop my descent. My head smacked against something hard, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I came to a stop at the bottom of the incline, lying face down in the muck. For a moment, I just lay there gasping for breath, my whole body aching from the fall I hoped against. Hope that I'd managed to lose whatever was chasing me. That hope was short-lived as I lay there trying to catch my breath and gather my wits. A familiar stench washed over me, that same rotting meat smell from earlier, but stronger now, close slowly, dreading what I might see. I opened my eyes. What I saw sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through my veins. The creature was right there, its hulking form towering over me. Up close, it was even more horrifying than I could have imagined. Its skin was a sickly grey, green colour that seemed to pulse with some sort of internal light. The creature's body was a mass of misshapen lumps and protrusions, as if it had been cobbled together from parts that didn't quite fit. But it was the head, or rather, the lack of one, that really got to me. Where a head should have been, there was just a misshapen lump with a gaping maw, lined with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth, and those eyes, they were back too, glowing red orbs that seemed to pierce right through to my soul. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me frozen in terror and this monstrosity from my worst nightmares. Then, with a speed that bellied its size, it lunged for me. I let out a owl scream, raising my arms instinctively in a pathetic attempt to defend myself. I braced for the impact, for the tearing of flesh and the agonizing pain that was sure to follow. The creature's teeth sank into my shoulder, and a blinding pain shot through my body. I cried out, the sound muffled by the thick, fetid air of the swamp. Desperation lent me strength I didn't know I had. I thrashed and kicked, my hands finding purchase on its leathery hide somehow through sheer luck, or maybe just survival instinct. I managed to break free. I scrambled away, leaving a trail of blood on the marshy ground. The creature roared in frustration, a sound that shook the trees around us and sent birds scattering into the night sky. It lunged for me again, but this time I was ready. I rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its deadly claws, but I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. My limbs felt like lead, my body screaming and protest at every movement. I needed a weapon, anything to even the odds. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement caught my eye. My old fishing rod. I must have dropped it when I fell down the embankment. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Lurching forward, I snatched up the rod, swinging the clunky metal pole like a makeshift weapon. The creature hissed, taken aback by my sudden offensive. I took advantage of its momentary hesitation to scramble up the muddy embankment I'd fallen down earlier. Reaching the top, I whirled around, expecting the creature to be hot on my heels. But for a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, only the oppressive silence of the swamp. Then that horrible stench filled my nostrils again, and I knew it was close. Suddenly, it erupted from the undergrowth, scrambling up the bank with surprising agility for something so large. I swung the fishing rod blindly, more out of panic than any real strategy. By some miracle, I managed to score a glancing blow against its monstrous head. The Creature bellowed and recoiled, but only for a second. I knew the fishing rod wouldn't hold up for long against this beast. I needed something better, something with more heft to it. My eyes darted around frantically, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. They landed on a thick fallen branch nearby. Adrenaline pumping through my veins, I heaved it up, the weight of it reassuring in my hands. With a scream that was equal parts to terror and rage, I charged at the creature wielding my makeshift spear. I slammed the branch into its shoulder, putting every ounce of strength I had. Behind the blow, there was a sickening squelch as the pointed end of the branch sank into the creature's flesh. The sound echoing in the night air, the creature shrieked a high-pitched screech that made my ears ring. It thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge the branch in its frenzy. The branch snapped, sending me stumbling backward. I lost my footing on the slippery ground and went sprawling onto my back. I looked up to see the creature towering over me, wounded but still very much a threat. A guttural growl built in its throat as it raised a clawed limb, ready to deliver what I was sure would be the killing blow. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end, but instead of the tearing of flesh, I heard something else. A blinding flash erupted behind my closed eyelids, followed by an ear-splitting boom that I recognized as a shotgun blast. My eyes flew open just in time to see the creature recoiling, smoke rising from its hide where the shotgun blast had seared a path. Before I could process what was happening, figures burst from the woods, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Hold on, a familiar voice yelled. To my utter disbelief, it was Jerry from Accounting Jerry, with his tuna sandwiches and his mushroom tea and his wild stories about monsters in the swamp. Jerry wielding a shotgun like some kind of action hero. He rushed forward, shotgun raised and ready for another shot. Behind him, I recognized two of the local park rangers, their own weapons drawn. The creature, caught in the confusion of the sudden attack and blinded by the flashlights, turned and scrambled back into the darkness. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the dense undergrowth, leaving behind only the lingering stench of rotting meat. Jerry knelt down beside me, his eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and concern. Holy hell, are you all right? He asked, giving me a once-over, I think. So I managed to choke out, though every part of me ached, and I could feel blood trickling from various cuts and scratches. The park rangers quickly assessed my injuries. Had some nasty gashes and bites, but miraculously nothing life-threatening. They patched me up as best they could with the contents of their first aid kit, all the while peppering me with questions about what had happened. The drive out of the swamp passed in a blur of flashing emergency lights and concerned queries. I gave what details I could describing the monstrous creature with its grotesque form and putrid stench. Jerry and the rangers exchanged worried glances as I spoke, but they nodded understandingly. It wasn't until we were safely out of the swamp and I was being loaded into an ambulance that the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. I had come face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something straight out of a nightmare, and I had survived. The next morning, I woke up in a hospital bed, my body patchwork of bandages and stitches. The local news was already running the story, though thankfully they hadn't released my name. Yet the headlines were sensational monster in the swamp and local man's terrifying encounter with unknown creature by midday news crews had descended on Cypress Grove Swamp. like vultures on a SOS police tape, blocked off the area where I had my encounter, and a team of investigators combed the scene for evidence. To everyone's surprise, they found plenty. There were massive footprints in the mud, larger than any bear tracks they'd ever seen. Scraps of coarse, unidentifiable fur were found snagged on thorns, and my poor old fishing rod, bent and mangled almost beyond recognition, stood as a testament to the strength of whatever had attacked me. The story quickly became a media sensation. I was interviewed on local news channels and even got a brief spot on some national programs. Skeptics abounded. Of course, many dismissed my story as a hoax or the ravings of a man who'd had too much to drink before driving home. But through it all, there was Jerry, good old Jerry from accounting. With his stinky tuna sandwiches and his wild theories, he became my unofficial spokesperson, defending me at every turn and backing up my story with his own account of that night in the swamp. Together, we made an unlikely but surprisingly effective team. Jerry's knowledge of local folklore and his tireless research efforts proved invaluable as we tried to make sense of what had happened. After countless hours spent scouring old books and records, Jerry stumbled across an obscure reference in a collection of local Native American folklore. It spoke of a swamp-dwelling demon that had plagued the area centuries ago. The description matched what I had seen almost perfectly, right down to the grotesque appearance and otherworldly stink in the end. Despite extensive searches, they never found the creature. It vanished back into the depths of the swamp, becoming yet another cryptic legend added to our area's already rich folklore. The national media eventually lost interest, but locally, the story of the Cypress Grove swamp monster became something of a sensation. As for me, well, my life changed in ways I never could have anticipated. For one, I don't take shortcuts through those woods anymore. No amount of time saved is worth the risk of encountering that thing again. I've become something of a local celebrity, though not always in a good way. Some folks treat me like a hero, while others think I'm just some attention-seeking liar. But the biggest change, my relationship with Jerry, who would have thought that the guy I once avoided because of his stinky lunches would end up being the person who saved my life. These days were practically inseparable. Those tuna sandwiches, they're not nearly as bad when you're sharing them with a guy who had your back when nobody else did. Jerry's obsession with the swamp and its mysteries hasn't waned. If anything, it's grown stronger. We spend a lot of our free time researching similar incidents around the world, corresponding with cryptozoologists and folklore experts. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever truly understand what happened that night. The experience has left its mark on me, both physically and mentally. I still have nightmares about glowing red eyes and the stench of rotting meat. The scars from the creature's attack serve as a constant reminder of how close I came to death, but they've also taught me an important lesson about keeping an open mind. You see, before all this happened, I was the kind of guy who scoffed at ghost stories and rolled my eyes at tales of the unexplained. Now, well, let's just say I'm a lot more willing to listen, because sometimes the line between myth and reality is a lot thinner than we'd like to believe. So if you're ever driving through our little town and you hear whispers about the Cypress Grove swamp monster, just remember there might be more truth to those stories than you'd think. And if you see a couple of guys, one with a slight limp and another munching on a tuna sandwich, poring over old books in the local diner. Feel free to stop by and say hello. We've always got room for one more believer. As for the creature itself, who knows, maybe it's still out there lurking in the murky depths of the swamp. Maybe it was a one-time occurrence, a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding, or maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. One thing's for certain though, I'll be ready next time, and you can bet Jerry will be right there beside me. Tuna sandwich in one hand and shotgun in the other.